Hi everyone, we're back and today we are talking about anemia. This is a really common subject, something a lot of people have questions around, and today hopefully we are debunking some myths. So Jen, why don't you start us off and tell us a bit about the different types of anemia?
Hi everyone, so there are lots of different kinds of anemia. To start with, we'll just say what anemia is. So the World Health Organization defines it as a condition in which the number of red blood cells or the hemoglobin concentration within the red blood cells is lower than normal. Hemoglobin is the protein found in red blood cells that carries oxygen in your body. Anemia literally means lack of blood. So the three most common causes of anemia are nutritional, hence why we're looking at them today. So we have pernicious anemia, which is a deficiency in B12, folate deficiency, and iron deficiency, which is the most common.
So who tends to be most at risk?
Also, the World Health Organization, they say that the people most at risk are women due to menstruation and pregnancy, and also children due to periods of rapid growth. So they estimate around 42% of children less than 5 years old and 40% of women worldwide are anemic. So it's quite high.
Wow.
Yeah, and then also people with cancer and problems with gut health are also in the at-risk groups.
Yeah, not being able to absorb for all those reasons.
Yeah.
What else can cause anemia?
Well, there's something like 90 different causes, but genetic conditions, infectious diseases, parasite infections, yeah, quite a lot. So we're just going to focus on the nutritional ones today.
Otherwise we'll be here forever. So let's start with iron deficient anemia. What are the symptoms?
Fatigue, weakness, dizziness, shortness of breath, hair loss, pale skin, poor concentration, and it's often, I'd just like to add here, it's the hair loss that people are usually most worried about. So yeah, the main symptoms are fatigue, weakness, dizziness, shortness of breath, pale skin, poor concentration, and hair loss. And it's usually hair loss that spark people to go and seek help, because it's quite a personal thing, isn't it, to have happen. So that usually triggers an investigation in people. It's also shown to affect cognitive and physical development in children and reduce productivity in adults. So this can have sort of long-term effects on have social and economic impacts for individuals and for families.
What about the more dangerous pernicious anemia?
So pernicious anemia symptoms develop more slowly over many years. This is because you can store B12 for, I think it's up to sort of 2 to 4 years. So if you've had a big dietary change, you become vegan, for instance, it can take a while for you to use up your stores and then realize that you have a deficiency. So the symptoms are quite extensive. There's a long list which we'll put in the bottom in the comments. There's a checklist on the Pernicious Anemia website, which is really useful. But tingling, difficulty remembering words, brain fog, paranoia, depression, mood swings, fatigue again, loss of appetite, weight loss, inflamed tongue, things like that.
And what makes that one different to the iron deficient anemia?
So pernicious anemia can be caused from an autoimmune point of view. So a healthy person will produce a protein in their stomach called intrinsic factor. This is produced by cells called parietal cells, and they're found in the lining of your stomach. So as well as producing intrinsic factor, they also produce hydrochloric acid, and they're both essential for releasing B12 from food and also absorbing it. Now these cells may fail, the parietal cells, which produce these two things I've just mentioned, may fail due to infection or because the body has produced antibodies to kill off those cells. So therefore you're unable to absorb B12. The elderly often develop pernicious anemia because of age-related sort of wasting of the gut wall, whilst younger people tend to have the classic autoimmune pernicious anemia. And then a deficiency in B12 can cause a decrease in red blood cells. And as I said before, stores can last for 2 to 4 years before needing to be replenished. So it can take a while for symptoms to develop, and to also attribute it to B12 rather than sort of, particularly in the elderly, it being sort of a general age thing. So yeah, it can be quite hard to pin down.
Needs some investigation, doesn't it?
Indeed.
And then finally, folate deficient anemia. How is that different?
So folate deficiency, well, the symptoms are also extreme tiredness, lack of energy, pins and needles, sore tongue again, mouth ulcers, muscle weakness. So there's a lot of sort of similar symptoms.
I was going to say, what can you do? What can you do if you're low in any of these, if you have anemia?
First of all, I'd say test. I think you can do a lot of scrabbling around in the dark and not necessarily know what you're dealing with. And I think that's something as nutritional therapists, we recommend, depending on obviously, finances and whatever. But if you can do some testing and find out what you're dealing with, then you have a much better idea of how to move forward. So you can ask the GP to do a full blood count, which they should readily do. And this will look at the number of red blood cells you have, but also it will look at your B12 levels, your folate levels, and your ferritin. Your ferritin is your stored version of iron. Just to know that this test that you can have done through the GP, they will be looking at serum B12. So it won't actually be looking at the active B12, it'll be looking at the total B12, and total B12, something like 85% of that B12 is attached to a protein and you won't be able to absorb it. So it'll give you a bit of a picture, but if you can do some further tests beyond the GP test, then that would be recommended.
And what sort of foods should we be eating to increase our intake?
So for iron, dark green leafy veg. Just to note on spinach also contains something called oxalic acid, which can interfere with iron absorption. So although we are used to hearing about, taking it for your muscles and all of this, actually spinach is great, but not necessarily for iron, just to note. So kale, spring greens, red meats, eggs. I'd also like to add that women need almost twice the amount of iron as men due to menstruation and pregnancy. So men obviously need iron, so can look at foods, but women, you can also sort of add in a supplementation which men don't really need to consider. I'd also like to add about tea and coffee. It interferes with iron absorption, so avoid having teas and coffees with your meals, particularly if you have a vulnerable iron status such as heavy periods.
Good point. And how about supplements? What do you have to say about that?
So supplements for iron, there are various different kinds. We won't get into the nitty-gritty now, but you'll have iron tablets prescribed by the doctor, or you could look at something like Floridix, which is a liquid iron. There is also another one called Spartone, which may be more gentle. People have sort of various side effects, so some may find some better than others, depending on whether they might get constipation, or others cause diarrhea. So it's worth investigating the different types of supplements. So good sources of B12 are milk, cheese, fish, eggs, shellfish, meat, especially offal, and insects if you're feeling brave.
Yeah.
There's no B12 in vegetables or fruit, and that's why vegans and potentially vegetarians are particularly vulnerable to becoming deficient in B12. So really recommend taking a supplement. Folate, green leafy veg again. I mean, this is, our hero. Pulses, orange juice, yeast extracts, liver again, potentially fortified breakfast cereals, but that's in the form of folic acid, and I'll come on to that now. Modern day processing of grains has stripped the folate out, and so rather than look at our processing methods, they've gone, right, let's just create a synthetic form of folate, which is folic acid. However, it's not as easily used by your body and can tend to sort of float around and block important enzymes and potentially affect the absorption of folate. So it's really worth investigating what kind of supplement you're taking, particularly as, you know, women who are hoping to become pregnant and pregnant are recommended to take folic acid. I would have a good look at someone like Dr. Ben Lynch. We'll put a link at the bottom of this. Look at his website and videos, and he describes the different versions of folate and the different versions of folic acid, because it can be very misleading on the back of supplements. So it's really worth noting, you know, what your body's going to use and which ones are not beneficial. So just to put that out there, really.
Yeah, all really useful stuff. And finally, what lifestyle factors should we be thinking about?
Ultimately, I mean, as nutritional therapists, you know, you probably agree, look at your food, you know, the diversity of things that you're eating. Nutrients come in lots of different sources, so increase diversity. That extends to your kids, you know, and obviously these days, you know, farming methods and stuff, there might not be the extent of the nutrients we wish in our food. So, you know, try and eat organically, and, you know, educate and test, and, you know, if you need to supplement, but, you know, seek some professional advice. Everyone's got a different story, and, you know, it's all worth investigating.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm also a believer of, food first is a much more fun way of getting our nutrients. And also, don't be afraid of eating like raw kale. It sounds kind of gross, but it's actually really nice. So something to think about.
Kale's a winner. I love kale.
Right? I know, maybe we should talk about kale one day. Well, thanks for watching, everyone. If you are watching this on YouTube, please like, subscribe, share, select notify. The websites mentioned today will be in the comments below. Next time we're talking about sleep, so stay tuned and we'll see you then.
Lovely. Thank you, everyone.